Hello, everyone. So nice to see you in the NSE room this afternoon. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1082nd New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Johanna Hedva and Victoria Papa. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest and host for today. Johanna Hedva is a Korean-American writer, artist, and musician from Los Angeles. Hedva is the author of the novels Your Love Is Not Good and On Hell, as well as Minerva the Miscarriage of the Brain, a collection of poems, performances, and essays. Their essay collection, How to Tell When We Will Die, on Pain, Disability, and Doom, is coming out in just a few weeks. And we will have a link to that in the chat. Victoria Papa is an associate professor of English and visual culture at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. Her research and teaching examine the intersection of creative expression and the survival of structural traumas in 20th and 21st century literature and visual culture. Her writing has appeared in publications including the Brooklyn Rail and Women in Performance. Victoria is co-creator of CARE Syllabus, a public humanities project and community education resource featuring original text, visual media, recordings, and live events by activists, artists, and academics. Vicky and Johanna, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'm so thrilled to turn it over to you, Vicky, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you to all of the team at Brooklyn Rail for hosting this conversation. So exciting to be here and in conversation with Johanna today. I have Eleanor on my screen, but I'm talking to Johanna right now. And Johanna, let me just start us off by saying, how exciting it is that this book is going to be out in the world. I think as someone who's been following your work now for a number of years, this book feels timely and necessary, and the idea of so much of your writing and your thinking that you've been producing over time, as well as more recently just for this book, to be collected in one place is such a resource for so many of us. I'm looking forward to kind of living with this book, teaching this book in the future, and I'm just so excited to jump into it today. So on that note, I've crafted some questions for Johanna, and I'm not going to be going according to script at all times during this conversation, but I thought I would kick us off with one question that I've kind of written out here. So I'm going to read it. In the beginning of How to Tell When We Will Die, Johanna, I'm talking to you, you tell our fortunes. No, you don't tell us when and how we're going to die. But you do, quote, portend that no matter how it arrives, disability will arrive for everyone. This, you argue, is what makes disability in all its vast disparities the most universal condition of all. Despite its leveling force, however, ableism has not yet faced a large-scale, widespread reckoning. How did these considerations guide, facilitate, challenge your writing of this book? When imagining your audience for this book, who were you thinking of? And as a prelude to someone reading the book, can you tell us a little bit more about why we continue to need ableism? So I'll turn it over to you, Han, to kick it off.
Yeah, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be joining you and having this space together. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail and to everyone all over in synchronous space with us. It's really exciting. I'm really pleased. My thought was to sort of set the stage here and the tone and the context, especially to try to answer Vicky's really great first question. I'm going to do a really short reading from the first essay of the book that Vicky is kind of speaking to in that question. It's about 8 minutes. I will read it, and then I think we can get into discussion. And yeah, my hope for today, this is one of the first public events that I've done for the book, and so I'm really excited to have you all. It's like maiden voyage, so it's really cool, and I'm really pleased about it all. So yeah, I'm going to read for about 8 minutes. Feel free to just chill out while I do that. If there's anything, like, I won't be able to see myself, so if I if my internet starts to suck or I get taken into the void, please somebody say something audibly so that I can hear it. All right, so this is from the first essay in the book. Over the last decade, we have seen large-scale reckonings with the ideologies of oppression and domination. The movements of Black Lives Matter and Me Too have arisen. The fight for queer and trans people to have basic respect, freedom, and rights has arrived in the mainstream. Globally, there have been uprisings against the corporate and imperial exploitation that powers climate change, and revolts against fascist and authoritarian regimes have fomented in the streets on 6 continents. I must note here the current genocide in Gaza against the Palestinian people, which has galvanized people everywhere, including those right here and right now in this space, to demand and agitate against those in power, those at the top, publishers, directors, members of the board, who have not yet committed to a free Palestine, to do so now. For example, if one is the publisher of a magazine of arts, culture, and critical theory, making a statement that publicly condemns Israel would be a good place to start. But we have yet to see the vastation of ableism at the same scale. Of course, disability justice activists have been and are still out here, and we will continue to be. But our work has not yet gotten into the world's water supply. The public understanding of terms like disability is still the medical model, that it is a body impaired and malfunctioning that requires course correction. Notions of how to treat disabled people are often washed in infantilization, if not outright eugenics. And when reckonings with ableism have entered the mainstream, they're usually superficial. A little sizzle about words, say a celebrity using intentionally or not a slur, and then apologizing for it. I am waiting, and I am getting impatient. I return to the same question over and over. What does ableism give us that we can't let go of? Why do we keep ableism so close? Stick to its well-worn ruts. Let me venture a guess. The word ability that is codified in the term ableism rests atop the condition of disability. And the most important part of the word disability is precisely the dis, the not, the lack, the apart from. Disability describes a condition that is both more othered from and profoundly closer to one's body than any other political condition that I can think of. It is a radical encounter with the needs of that body, and therefore, the ways in which that body's autonomy is limited and its dependency decided. And this dependency, this ontology of need, is what yokes it into a matrix of power. How it has or does not have power, and what sort of material conditions that determines. Is this body empowered to decide its own fate? Does this body have the power to guarantee its own survival, support, resources, thriving? With disability, the answer to these questions is often no. And this is what makes disability political. Because the political is foremost about power. Who has power, who does not, why, and what can be done about it. As a CRIP friend once said in reply to someone using the euphemism differently abled, quote unquote, which is a term that the disabled community sees as a prevarication in service to ableism. My friend said, yo, it's the dis part that makes it political. There's so many ways one can enter the category of disability. It can be a condition one is born into. It can be an injury caused by an accident. It can be the creep and seep of a long illness. It need not be an illness or a disease at all. It can be a diagnosis not agreed with. It can be a disease or an injury recovered from, but that still requires monitoring, medications, treatment. It can be a realization far into adult life about a condition, diagnosed or not, that has been there for decades. And it can be all of these things, a teeming list. And yet I am in agreement with those in the disabled community who would portend that no matter how it arrives, disability will arrive for everyone, sooner or later. And in a way, this vastly disparate category is the most universal condition of all. The horizon of it is just closer to some than others. It is always there. And the question is not if, but when it will arrive for you. This is not the same as any other political identity. Not everyone on this planet will one day become queer or not white or a woman or colonized, but they will become disabled. Despite its myriad differences and sweeping totality, however one enters this category, once there, a disabled person is fundamentally, materially different than an abled person. And there is no way around this. When one is disabled, this is a markedly real difference from one who is not yet disabled. Being lame is felt every time you try to move. Being sick is an obvious diversion from not having to contend with pain, fever, snot, vomiting, headache. Being mentally ill cuts to the quick of one's facility for any given day. Not being able to climb stairs or open a door or carry something or process language defines one's entire life. And no matter what form of disability arrives for you, it will bring struggle, suffering, incapacity, limit, and pain. It will make basic tasks like trying to survive on this planet seem impossible and be impossible. Sometimes your daily to-do list must include things like cook and shower, and sometimes you won't be able to check them off as done. So as conditions, illness and disability measure what cannot be done now. And as direction, telos, prophecy, they define what one day we won't ever be able to do again. And this is why we need ableism. Ableism protects us from the most brutal truth that our bodies will disobey us, malfunction, deteriorate, need help, be too expensive, decline until they finally stop moving and die. Ableism is what lets us believe that this doesn't have to be true, or at least that we can forestall it, keep it at bay, and that is based entirely upon our own will. Ableism and its fantasies allow us to operate as if our abilities, our bodies, are always at our command, under our control, and that they will function when and how and for as long as we want them to and as we need them to. Of course, we would prefer to believe that rather than the opposite. So how then to ask people to execrate ableism as an ideology of harm, discrimination, and oppression, when it is the very thing that insulates us from the fact of our own impending limits and mortality? How to demand society divest from the consolation, no matter how deceitful and delusory, in which ableism swathes us? What will it take to spur people on a massive scale to tear down the system of ableism, when doing so will leave no cushion between us and the actuality of all the ways we will suffer, we will be in pain, we will be unable to do what we want, and eventually and inevitably we will die? How do we build a politic that stares into the face of our own end and finds a way to continue? It's an unendurable task. And the only way I can think to do this is to say, let's do it together. So with that, I think we can open up the discussion.
Wow, Johanna. It's I'm glad that you chose to read that at length. I'm just sort of thinking about how a book participates in this doing together, the doing it together, the looking in the face of death, and by way of that, participating in a form of activism. And I guess I'd maybe a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind, kind of talking about the notion of audience and the notion of when you were writing this book and sort of thinking about this idea that disability will arrive for everyone. Oh, and yet for folks and people who've had direct experiences, who are in pain now, who are navigating disability now, and sort of speaking to that. And then also this idea that in some ways, this is a conversation that everyone belongs to. So yeah, I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit maybe about that?
Yeah, I loved this question because the question of the audience was obviously a hugely important one, and also one that changed over the course of the writing. I mean, maybe it's useful to sort of note that the book is a collection of essays that took me 10 years to write. And so in a lot of ways, it's not really like a book that started out as I was asking one question and then at the end I arrived at an answer. I think it's a book that asks more questions than it answers. And I think one of the central questions that is going on in many different ways in the book is precisely it's not necessarily an audience question, but it is who is the we? I think in a lot of ways, the current political moment, and then certainly the political moment of the 10 years I was writing this book, the question of we, who we are, what we are doing to each other, what we owe each other, is a we as a collective possible? How is it possible? What can be done? All of these questions, these are very kind of huge. And so one of the things, it was important to me that it was we in the title.
Mm-hmm.
It was important to me that there was space to think about universality that wasn't a collapsed, kind of flattened sameness. I have a quote in the book from Natalie Diaz, who I adore, where she said, allness doesn't have to mean sameness. And so there's something I think about disability that really I understand in that way. It is a universal condition, but that doesn't mean it's the same for everyone. And it also doesn't mean that, like, there are different kinds and there are different experiences of it. And there are also different ways that people understand disability in themselves that I wanted there to be space for. I've been kind of saying, I feel like my project is really simple. It's just that I want disability to be more complex. I want there to be like a kind of expansiveness around this category that we would otherwise think is very narrow and restrictive and like limiting. I was like, no, it's actually like a lot of different stuff. And like the experiences that we go through in our bodies, you know, that have to do with things like pain and struggle and suffering. You know, ableism tells us that that means just one thing. There's like one option for you if you experience this. And the story is that it's bad. Disability is bad. You should feel bad about yourself. You should feel ashamed. And I guess my hope with the book was I think there are pieces in this book that can meet people who are first encountering things like illness or disability in themselves, or maybe taking care of someone else or a loved one. And then I also hope that there are pieces that can meet or land with people who've sort of been in it for a while. And that's what I mean, is I wanted the story of disability to be more than one story. I wanted there to be like chapter 1 and chapter 20, and like what happens to get to these different stories, these different characters, even genres, you know. It's like sometimes it's a comedy, sometimes it's a tragedy. Like there's actually quite a lot here. Yeah, and then just to kind of speak a little bit more to the audience question is like, I guess my feeling too was that I wanted to be respectful of people that might be like, well, I don't want to be disabled. And I didn't want my book to kind of punish them or shame them if they felt that way. I didn't want to be in the business of selling triumph. Like, you can love yourself and it'll be fine. There was more of a feeling that I thought was useful to say, okay, if you can, maybe try to think about how your symptoms or your lived experience in your body, your embodiment, is different than the world telling you it means a certain thing. That these are actually different. And just to sort of feel into that space. Like, you can be in pain and struggling and suffering. And that's different than the world telling you that it's shameful. So I feel like that kind of opening up that distinction was important.
Yeah, I think, Johanna, you just froze for me, or is that mine? Maybe I don't. Okay, no. But you're back. And okay, so yeah, I mean, one of the things in terms of that nuance and kind of opening up and telling the story, I mean, I think it's something that the book accomplishes, you know, in a tremendous way. I mean, the arc of the book is quite incredible, and I think in part it can only, you know, the idea that it took a decade to compile this work, you know, is part of that, you know, the multifaceted nature of the story and all of its twists and turns. But I was thinking a little bit about this idea of like opening up terms and opening up stories. And so like disability, it doesn't look one way. Pain doesn't just have to be bad or necessarily shameful. And one of the ways that I was really struck with the book that you were sort of like troubling terms or opening them up, maybe troubling isn't the right word, was this relationship between care and pain. Because I hadn't actually, maybe I had thought about care as a response to pain, but I hadn't necessarily thought, and it's been a key word for me, you know, a word that I've been working with for now several years, care, and it's been a buzzword of sorts, right? That you've been, you know, contributing to that conversation for quite some time. But this idea that care is intertwined with pain, that they both make paths for each other to move along, as you put it. And you also write to the idea that there's no greater intent to do care together than a willingness to do pain together. And that care can scare you like a roller coaster, show you viscerally how the law of gravity feels, and it can teach you, let you know briefly what it feels like to escape gravity. And so I'm sort of thinking about that politics of care, like bound up with pain. And what maybe bringing these two words together does for us, particularly in this moment, where I think that when we think about the moment that we're in, the pressures that are upon us, the atrocities that are happening, you know, I'm just sort of wondering like what this dynamic between care and pain might teach us about resistance, might teach us about rebellion, revolution. Is there something in that, you know, that helps us orientate differently, perhaps, or more expansively to our activist work and you know, other sort of related matters?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, like, I guess, yeah. I mean, maybe another like kind of bit of just context for that might be useful is like, you know, I started writing Sick Woman Theory in 2014, so 10 years ago, and it came out in January 2016. And at the time, it felt totally radical to say that care was important politically. It felt like wild to say that. And I think it was a kind of a nascent idea, at least for me. I mean, Sick Woman Theory was really the first time I had sort of thought through kind of the politics of things like illness and disability and how that is attendant to larger questions of like care, social care, mutual aid, like what do we owe each other, etc. How do we take care of each other? But I think over the years, yeah, care kind of became a weird virtue signal without much behind it, especially in the art world. There'd be a lot of exhibitions on like care, quote unquote, and it would be like very extractive. It would not be a practice, in other words. It would be a, you know, just a word. And so I started to think like, well, what do I mean when I say care or a politics of care? And I think what started to emerge was something like I noticed that in the activist spaces and organizations that I was in, you know, where we're on the left, we're trying to work towards something. I noticed that like the minute there was conflict, real difficulty, like real failure, real difficulty, real like, it just fell apart. The horizon just was conflict and the horizon was really close and it would just fall apart. And I started to notice the word care getting kind of trotted out almost as if like it was a, like a numbing agent, like that care implied numbing or forgetting or diminishing the sort of sharp parts or the messiness or the harm or the conflict or the difficulty. And I started to be like, I actually think that's wrong, because my feeling is that the the leveraging of care as sort of a tool to control, a tool to surveil, a tool to dominate, that's not care. That's coming from a more carceral or punitive or curative idea. And I mean, one of the things that kind of, another way to say this is that if capitalism paid for care, it would be the end of capitalism. You can't have capitalism and care in the same regime, because capitalism pays for prisons and wars and weapons, and it cannot reconcile that kind of, the resources being allocated to that kind of a way of doing things, and then also to allocate resources toward care. And this is why care under capitalism, and when I say care under capitalism, care is in scare quotes because it's not care. The kinds of systems that we have now are not care. They're systems of, carcerality, they're punitive, they're curative, they're like, you need to be fixed, and if you can't be fixed, you're not valuable. They're very punitive. And so I guess for me, the idea that if we care for you, you somehow, you're a functioning member of society, that's the logic going on with care right now. It doesn't really make space for all of the messy kind of ways that a body needs constantly and has pain and is difficult. Like the body is sort of a thorn in the side of capitalism. A friend of mine just said that to me. And so I think when you start to prioritize things like care in practice, like what does it actually mean? I think care actually means really making support for exactly things like the unruliness of the body, the expensiveness of the body, the needs that are always there, the pain, the harm, the violence that's just sort of circulating all the time. Care has to be able to hold that. And I guess it's just sort of a bummer that we don't necessarily know that care is required until there's pain first. That's just kind of a bummer. But I think it's true, we kind of we know that care is required when there's oh no, something's been damaged here and we need to take care of it. I wish that weren't the case, but I think it is true. And I mean that in a kind of interpersonal level as well as a political level. The way we've sort of built our world is that care kind of comes as an afterthought, and just to say, we saw that happen in COVID. We saw the thing that happened in COVID is suddenly care had to be prioritized. And look at how hard it was to do. It made everybody's lives so hard and miserable and difficult. And that was not because COVID changed the world. It was because the world kept functioning the way we've built it. But COVID was demanding that we had to do it differently. We had to foreground care, prioritize care, put money into care as this is the primary thing that a society needs to do. And we couldn't do it. That's why it was so hard. So I think about that, when we did just get a very recent, demand that care be prioritized, the world kind of wasn't built to do that,
Yeah. I'm thinking, I think a lot of us now, it's sort of what has sort of stayed from that moment of the kind of height of the pandemic and what it sort of taught us about how we're willing to care, or what sort of systems are in place that allow for care to possibly happen or for care to fail. And that kind of failure that came out of that you're just sort of speaking to, we couldn't do it. And I guess I'm kind of thinking about how that relates overall to this sort of notion that you have, and it's an essay in the book, Notes on Activism, aka Notes on Failure. I kind of like love this as sort of thinking as a kind of like a method of sorts. There's a kind of method there, or a way to kind of be in with what we're trying to do, the changes we're trying to make happen, and to stay with, that kind of difficulty that you mentioned, and like that idea of like when it does get messy, and not just like when the bodies get messy, when we're in the throes of pain, when we get messy with one another, like how we negotiate that. I don't know, like, do you like that failure when it comes particularly kind of thinking about what we've come out of and what we saw with COVID and where we're at now with that? I don't know, do you think if we kind of think about that as an instance of failure, where does that, I don't know, do you want to kind of maybe speak a little bit to that notion of the relate a little bit more about failure, and then like also just kind of thinking about, because I'm curious what you might have to say about what that failure of seeing, like how the response to COVID, where that left us, where does that leave us now?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's just sort of something I think about a lot, because I feel like, at some point in just working, doing activism myself, I just felt like, oh man, like I got burnt out a lot. I felt despairing quite often. And at some point, just shifting my kind of orientation toward what I was actually trying to do with my activism and what I could kind of expect from it and what it was as a practice. When I kind of shifted that to be like, oh, I think it always fails, actually. And what I mean by that is like, yes, it would be lovely to imagine a world where these things were not there. Be great if there wasn't racism, fucking sexism, fucking colonialism, fucking all this nonsense. Like, it would be great if that just like wasn't a thing. And yet they all are not just some things that we sometimes deal with, they are like structuring our entire existence. And so I feel like in that as a condition, just as a kind of default environment, any kind of activism where we're trying to prioritize things like justice and equality and basic fucking freedom, and like just like the freedom to live a life that is not constantly being threatened by harm and etc. It's like trying to work toward those things in the world that we are in. The work toward these things will fail. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it just started to feel different to me when I just put that in the beginning rather than the end. This is sort of one of my things that you've heard me talk about a lot over the years. It's like at some point I started to realize like having doom kind of loom on like the dread of it, like in the future as the worst possible outcome, that felt much worse than just sort of starting from doom and being like, oh, we're doomed now. So what can we do? Like, where do we go from there? Rather than like, because I guess, and I've said this before, like over the years too, is like I just started to notice a lot of people like giving up because they felt like they had no hope. They would, and I feel like that's a very common thing right now. It's like, what can you even do about anything? Climate catastrophe, genocide, capitalism, all of these things, like what can even be done? And there's a feeling of just like, well, it's hopeless, so we should give up, right? And my feeling is like, I don't think we should give up, but I do think we should start to reorient ourselves to the fight is that we are going to lose for sure. But that doesn't mean we should give up. It means we should train differently. We should strategize our fighting differently. It's very David and Goliath kind of stoner epiphany like vibes, you know? It's like, oh, capitalism is a huge opponent and it fights dirty and it's rigged the entire game. Like, of course we're gonna fucking lose that fight. But what happens if we get in the ring knowing that, rather than having this sort of hope, oh, we're going to beat it, we're going to do, you know, my activism is going to succeed and then we'll be done, you know, like what happens if we get in the ring knowing that this fight is going to be a long one and we're probably going to get really beat up in it. And that's actually part of it. What can we do with that knowledge? Don't give up, but know that the fight is not fair. And so what are the strategies? How can we help each other do this? I mean, there's a whole essay in the book about how I like really unironically love the UFC, which kind of sucks because like you know, Trump is always in the goddamn audience of a UFC fight. And it's really annoying, God, because like, you know, like, but I like love it because there's something about watching fighters like who have a tremendous amount of like respect and ritual and craft for each other, like about what they're doing. And the other reason I love the UFC is that it's the only kind of spectacle entertainment thing I can think of where the care that is required in order to do the fight is included in what you're watching as an audience. You know, a UFC fighter only fights like 2 or 3 fights a year, and they're like 15 minutes long. But everything else in their world is the care and the preparation that is required to do this and the support that they need. Their whole team, everybody at the gym, they're all like working. I just feel like I would like activism to really feel like this, as opposed to like, if I disagree with you, then we can't keep fighting for this common cause. If there's a conflict there. Sorry, I don't know if this is, I don't have an answer, but I just feel like it would be cool if on the left, we didn't just fall apart so quickly when there's conflict in the ranks, so to speak, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that your work offers me is a place to go where you are willing to look at something kind of what feels like fearlessly or something. I don't know if that's the exact right term, but you know, this idea that like, because that failure can be, you know, heartbreaking, right? Like this idea like we're going to lose, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You know, when you really face that, you know, when you really are holding that, you know, I don't even know if we can really face it, right? But you're holding that and you're going there in so many ways in this, you know, throughout your work and in this book particularly. But one of the ways that, you know, another place you're kind of willing to go and kind of put yourself out there in terms of it is like the way that you, but I think like a way that you kind of negotiate in the book how you're thinking about care and how it unfolds in everyday life for you, and you're willing to go there, is to kind of talk directly about sex and kink and how those have been places where you have learned about care practices and have come to be thinking, you know, through these sort of methods and these ideas. And I don't know. I mean, it's kind of related to this care and pain question, but you know, I love how that, you know, sex is part of this story in ways that, you know, you're not going to get a mainstream narrative about disability and illness that's sexy. I mean, maybe there's like a few outliers out there, but generally like not. And so, you know, I just am wondering, like, if you could talk a little bit about your decision to kind of include these stories in these essays that deal directly with this, and then maybe speaking and giving us a little bit of a sense of kind of, you know, how kink enters this conversation for you, and what it is doing and teaching in terms of care.
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. It's something that was very important to me to have in a book about disability. I was like, there needs to be a substantial section, like multiple pieces about sex, because for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is exactly what you're saying. I think it's not, ableism doesn't really allow sick and disabled people to have any kind of pleasure in their wretched bodies, quote unquote. And that's just not the case in my experience. All the disabled people that I know are like the kinkiest, freakiest, folks. And I feel like one of the things that disability does is it really demands that if you are disabled, it really demands that you become a genius about how your body can transform. And transform through things that would seem scary or painful, right? Like it transforms through pain, it transforms through all of this kind of ways that it's limited. And what I just started to notice, I mean, kink is a huge part of my life. I used to work as a pro dom in my 20s. One thing that I noticed in kink is that I wished that the kinds of conversations and dynamics I was having in my kink life were the kinds I could have in my care life. Like, for example, in kink, the premise of kink is that we're all freaks and we want different things and we want maybe weird shit and there's like deviance maybe according to mainstream values. But the idea with kink is we're all freaks. So like, how do we support that? And care is like the opposite. Care is like, oh no, you want that weird thing or you need that, or your body's doing something strange. Like we should manage you back into normalcy. You can't be a freak about that, And I just wish that care was done in the way that kink is done, because in kink, there's a tremendous amount of mutuality. Yes, power as a dynamic is right it's in the mouth. You have to negotiate it, you have to talk about it, you have to consent and communicate around it. But that is what makes it equitable. And that's how I feel care could really be done, as a mutual kind of almost like a field that we are all positioned in, rather than like, I am giving care to you, you are taking it from me. There's this debt logic, you owe me now, you're less powerful, whatever, etc. So it was just, it just started to feel like it's very important also to write an entire book about the body and not have the body in all of these different states that are kind of not only vulnerable and fragile, but also full of pleasure, full of power, full of ecstasy and transformation. And I have noticed it is like kind of giving some people who are reading the book a bit of confusion, that like I've been like saying, like it's hard to maybe reconcile a sick woman on page 1, full of pain, not able to get out of bed, etc. It's hard to reconcile that as a character on page 50, like punching men consensually for pleasure and being kind of like, like a badass and having a good time, like, and having her body be full of like feelings like, pleasure, ecstasy, fun. So it was just important to me that this would be also in the story. Again, that I just wanted like disability to include more. Like I wanted there to be more. And I feel like that was one of the ways in to that for sure.
Yeah, and that it kind of leads me to a question about, you're talking about transformation and the way that, you're bringing yourself really through all of these different experiences, and what you were saying about, the relationship between disability and transformation and needing to kind of know one's body and be with the changes of one's body and to adapt. But this is like, well, I guess this is the question where I'm sort of thinking about this invitation you give us at the start of the book to watch something change. and the way that change is not only something you're exploring as you were just speaking to, like, okay, what does my body look like when I'm having sex? What does my body look like when I'm, you know, on the toilet? What is it, you know, right? Like, but this idea of change, what I sort of see is that, you know, it's also related to kind of your writing practice, right? Like you're interested in writing about these things because you want to see what happens in the writing itself and how the writing shapeshifts, changes these experiences. It's part of your craft. It's part of your relationship to form. And so I want to think about the book not only as, you know, a testament to these ideas and to these methods and, you know, giving us things to work with and to practice with, but also as a piece of writing that I think, you know, you're weaving something here. There's something kind of coming together about what writing does, what thinking on the page does, to the, you know, into the body, into storytelling. And, you know, I think that there's a kind of, you know, lineage of, you know, feminist and queer writing that you're evoking here. But I don't know, if you have it, like, maybe you could tease that out a little bit more, like what writing does for you. And then that might, because I know we're going to be taking some questions from the audience soon, but that might also relate to, you know, your process of going back to some of these essays, you know, Sick Women Theory for sure, you know, Defense of Deep Persons, you know, several essays throughout that you're revisiting over time, what it was like to kind of go back to them, to open them up, to contextualize them in the present. It's actually one of the things, as someone who's been following your work for several years, that I really enjoy. I enjoy that you like didn't just, you know, print the essay as it was first published, but that you went back to it. I think I love it. I love it as a practice, this idea that the writing is never done, you know, that it's always transforming and it's always changing. And I love that, you know, you were able to do that with this book too.
Oh, thank you. That's
Yeah.
lovely. Yeah, it's just you know, I'm the sort of bitch that wants things to change. Like I like just in general, like I want, and I kind of think like as a writer, it's like for me, like what's most exciting is to get a sentence down and to be like, all right, like, you know, that we've consolidated meaning here. There's something we're building. It looks good. You know, the words are all in the right order. And then my favorite thing to do is to like, what happens if the period is changed to a question mark? Or what happens if this word is changed to an antonym? Just what happens? Like, and I really do feel like the point of meaning is that it can change. And I feel like as a writer, that's what I'm most interested in exploring and kind of being in. I write 500 words a day every day, and I've done that for 20 years. And it's not that I write slow. I write a lot. It just takes me a long time to feel like in the writing, I've gone everywhere that it could go. It's like I want to see what happens to an idea, to thinking itself, to a feeling, whatever, when it's like it gets, the form of it is changed. And I realized this at some point when writing the book, and there's like a kind of acknowledgement of that in some of the essays of like, maybe I want this because that's what happened to my body, is that I thought it meant one thing. And then as I've lived in it, it's constantly surprised me and confused me and changed to that which I did not expect, you know, or didn't even have, you know, like, you know, when I first started to get sick and disabled, I was just like horrified. Like, wait, what? And I think that that's very common when disability arrives for people. It's like, they're like, wait a minute, this is not who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to kind of, they're like forced into this new knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Maybe during the Q&A, we can like run this little slideshow that we threw together of some of my work, my other work that's not writing, which is which is sort of like, I mean, just to kind of give some like a little comment to this is like, for me, what's just most exciting is to, yeah, there I am getting my face fisted by Ron Athey. Such a darling. Ron is a dear friend. He's an absolute legend, queer icon in LA to us queerdos. And his work is a huge touchstone for me, in terms of pain and the body and desire and the kind of almost spiritual or religious ecstasy that is possible around those things. But I'll just say, like, when I'm like making stuff, I just have a bunch of questions and I just want to be delightfully surprised by that which I don't know. I'll have like an idea or a question or a thought, and I'm like, what happens if I ask this in like an essay versus a doom metal record versus a video game versus a sculpture? And I guess I just do that because it just feels cool, like like fun, you know? Because that's I think what I'm trying to say too about disability is like, yes, of course, there's pain and struggle and limitation and suffering attendant to it, but it's also this really incredibly expansive experience. It changes everything that you knew to be true about yourself, how you move through the world, what's possible in your body, what's possible in your relationships to other people. Like, and that's what I'm saying is like ableism tells you that all of that change and transformation is bad. But it's actually not only bad. It sucks. There's a lot that sucks about being disabled for sure. But there's also a lot that's like really, really rich. And I guess just kind of for me at some point, I wanted to move toward, I just wanted there to be more. I didn't want there to only be bad or one thing. I was like, what else? What else is here? So maybe that's a good way to end. What else? Does anyone want to
What
ask
else?
a question?
I love that. I mean, I have more questions. I have like one more question that I kind of want to get to, but I also don't know how many questions our audience, if there's lots of questions. So I don't know, Eleanor, or maybe some.
You can definitely ask another question, Vicky.
Okay, I'll ask one more question, but it's really connected to what you were just saying about the more, Johanna, if that's okay with you too. But I wanted to ask the question about tell being, you know, as you tell us in the book, the most important word in the book's title, and how that aligns with acts of divination and, you know, drawing up questions of fate versus free will, and this idea of how we can deviate from that which is determined or diagnosed, prescribed, etc. You know, in one sense, the book is a testament to your fate, and in another, the telling in and of itself in which you're engaged is a creative act of expansion, of taking what is and producing more life, not less. And, you know, it's the languages of esoteric divination practices like astrology that have helped you arrive, you know, among many other things, you know, at concepts that guide your writing. And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to maybe you could just touch upon, you know, how not only astrology, maybe other esoteric influences, you know, factor into this book, into your practices, and how you arrived at the title of this book. You know, the title, you know, anyone I've sort of mentioned the title to, everyone, you know, kind of raises an eyebrow and kind of smirks, and, you know, there's a real reaction to the title.
Yeah, good. We want to wake them up. Yeah, the telling. I mean, I just, you know, this is one of those words that I just kind of think about a lot. I love a word that has more than one meaning. They're my favorite kinds. I I just started to think, I guess, going back to this thing, we almost started the whole conversation around of like the experience that I kind of felt I was having in my own body around illness and disability and like need and support and pain and care and all of this stuff. I was feeling all these ways about it. And then I noticed that like the world was telling me it meant something, a certain thing. And I was getting told by doctors, by social workers, by therapists, by whomever, I was being told quite a lot what my stuff meant, what I could do about it, what I could not do about it, And I just started to really understand, like, wow, it is really something to be told what your experience in your body means. I think this is true not just with disability, right? It's like, for example, I'm just using myself as an example, but like being a white passing Korean American person feels a certain way. It has meant certain things. It has brought me to certain experiences. And then there's also what the world tells me that's supposed to be. All of the ways in which I'm not Korean, or that I'm not white, or that I'm not allowed in a certain place, or that I, don't, whatever. And I think that that's true about most identities. There's like a kind of experience that we have around it in an embodied way, how we carry it, how we go through the world. And then the world like tells you what it's supposed to mean. And these are like different things. And yet what the world tells you it means has a huge impact on how you know anything. So it was important to me to really think about that. Like, what are disabled people told all the time is true about them, and how a lot of that is a lie, or it's not the whole story. It doesn't have to be the whole story. I also like the idea of telling as like, yeah, foretelling, fortune telling, storytelling. I just love all that shit. I just think like, language on some level to me is it's like a primary magic. You can write a sentence and like, whoa, this is now true. And then you can write the opposite and whoa, that's also true. It's just kind of amazing to me that that's how that works. So yeah, I mean, also the title, I did want to kind of, I guess it's just sort of my vibe, I mean, like, like I'm a bit intense and dark and I'm very not demure, darling. So I'm fine to just be like that for people. Like my one hope is that this book can kind of get us into disability 2.0. I hope that people are reading lots of disabled writers, engaging in lots of disabled art. They know multiple different disabled people's names and works and lives. And I hope that I'm just like kind of one part of that constellation. And maybe mine is the doomy, dark, gothy, scary one, which is cute. I'm down to be that. But I'm just saying, it's like, I was like, okay, I'll be the one to really go for the death angle and the doom angle. Like, that's sort of where I live anyway. So that's cool. But yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful for you going there for us.
Thank you. Yeah, come on in. Come on into the darkness of the nothingness of the void. It's really fun.
Well, I think, yeah, we'll take questions. If there's more questions other than mine, I think we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vicky and Johanna, for this incredibly brilliant and profound conversation. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. So I'm just really excited for these dialogues to continue, and of course to read the book, which we're gonna drop in the chat again. I'd also just want to remind everyone in the audience that if you would like to ask a question, there is a form link that you can click on to fill out to send a question in, which is in the chat as well. And to get started, our first question is from Madison.
Hi, thanks, Eleanor. Can you hear me okay? Okay, amazing. So, the discussion of kink earlier seemed to get at a sense of radical openness. And I was wondering if, I don't know, either of you feel like there's a freedom of expression when there's a rejection of a perceived status quo in society, whether that's like a rejection of vanilla sex or an ableist existence. Do you feel that those who are already exposed to the experience of disability also experience radical openness? Or is that maybe oversimplified? Your discussion just brought up a lot of themes for me of silencing and voice. So, Johanna, if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't conflate, like, I wouldn't say like every disabled person is a kinky freak, although most of the ones I know are. But I mean, you know, obviously kink is a preference.
Yeah, I think I meant them almost as separate experiences, but both existing separate from sort of like a perceived status quo of some sort.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's one of the things that's interesting about disability is it's a very, common illness. It's like happens to everybody, and yet we talk about it as being like a deviant aberration of the norm. And that's funny to me. I mean, to put it lightly. And I think that like this, what I just like the kind of way that what I was saying about kink, like kind of foregrounding an abnormal, quote unquote, or a deviant or like something that's not supposed to be acceptable. Like kink kind of foregrounds it in a way that I just really appreciate. And yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of different strategies and coping mechanisms that I feel like disabled people use, intentionally or not. I mean, for some of us, really claiming monstrosity, really going into abjection and wretchedness and deviance is one of the ways that we feel empowered. It's kind of like being like, yeah, fuck you, I am a freak, is kind of like an empowerment. I mean, Audre Lorde has talked about, nothing that I actually accept about myself can be used to diminish me. That's kind of a paraphrase of a quote of hers, but I feel like that about disability. I'm one of the ones that's like, yeah, I'm a monster. Yeah, I'm a freak. Yeah, I'm like broken. Yes. Like that's actually part of the way that my own embodiment feels more liberated. I understand that that's not for everyone though, and that's fine. Like I actually have a tremendous amount of compassion and respect for people's various ways of identifying and coping and surviving in their own bodies. Like kink's not for everyone. Being out in the street in a disability justice march, crawling around saying you're a monster is not for everyone, and that's like kind of fine. I guess that's what I mean is like allness doesn't have to mean sameness. And I guess the universality that I'm trying to talk about with disability doesn't just mean we're all out here feeling great about ourselves being disabled. I want there to be space for the frustration and the despair and the sadness and the like exhaustion too, and I guess why I bring kink into it is in kink you can say what you need and what you want, and then the other person or people can agree to it or not, or they can say what they need and what they want and what they can do and what they can't do. And there's a kind of way that that is supported. There's like a kind of, it's a mutuality at best, obviously, but yeah, I would say that is what I'm trying to think about. Like what's possible with care, what's possible and to how to do it in a way that feels good for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Johanna. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Madison. That was such a great question. We've got another question here from Jan. And I will give you the chance to unmute Jan if you'd like to ask. Or John.
Sure. Hi,
Hi.
how are you? I was wondering if you know the work of Bob Flanagan and Sherry Rose on kink and disability and care.
Yes, I love them, obviously. Yes. Did you have a question about it, or did you just want to be like Bob Flanagan rules? Well, I do agree, Bob Flanagan rules. Or I mean, I don't know if you're speaking, you're not coming through, but
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you'd like.
Yeah. Have you ever had a chance to see them perform, or
no,
have you
he had passed on by the time I was around to go see something like that. But I adore his writing. I would very strongly recommend anyone here read The Pain Journal.
Oh, okay.
By Bob Flanagan is so fabulous. Also, you know, I'm a big Nine Inch Nails fan, and he was in the Happiness and Slavery video by Nine Inch
Right,
Nails.
exactly. And have are they part of your book, Sherry Rose and Bob Flanagan? Do you mention them in your book?
Not directly, really. But they are cited in the there's like a big reading list in the back, and they are cited in there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read your book. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for that great question. And thanks, Johanna, for that answer. We've got another question here from Bitter, and I will read it on their behalf. Who or what are some of the ghosts that haunt this book? You can interpret this however you wish: literary influences, conceptual and political ghosts, etc.
That's a great question. I mean, that's a great question. Thank you for it. Yeah, I mean, there are certainly personal ghosts for sure. The ancestors are like really, you know, wanting me to heal them with this one. My Korean shaman and I have been talking about it for years. That this is the book that's gonna like get a lot done for the ancestors. But kind of maybe more like other writers and artists. I mean, certainly, yeah. Thanks for invoking Bob Flanagan and Sherry Rose. Honestly, you know, at the beginning, I didn't really know what kind of book it was going to be. Like, I was like, is it an academic book? Is it one topic? Like, again, like starting at the beginning and then writing on a topic and ending at an answer. At some point, I started to like think of it as a bit more, I wanted it to have multiple genre and form and kind of literary styles in it, like maybe more like an Anne Carson book. Some comps, like I remember thinking like, oh, it could be like this or it could be like that. Like I wanted to like, I was reading David Winara, which is Close to the Knives, which just kind of seemed like it could get at this sort of collection of pieces, the personal kind of private body with the social political body. Also just great weird writing that happens in Close to the Knives. You know, this is a weird comp, but I really thought a lot about Elizabeth Hardwick. There's a collection of hers called Seduction and Betrayal that I adore. And I just think she's amazing. She's one of my absolute favorites. I thought about White Girls by Hilton Als, especially that first essay in that one. Trees Tropique, I think it's called. It's a long like 50 pager. Yeah, obviously like Audre Lorde, who I already mentioned, is somebody that's been on my kind of shoulder for years. I did also think about people like Simone Weil, a lot. Simone Weil is somebody who I reread regularly. I really adore. And she's so tricky. She really wasn't, there was a lot about her work that was kind of pathologized in her lifetime and after, especially when she starts talking about God, everyone's like, oh God, oh no, she must be crazy. I think like the word fearless came up at some point in this talk. I wouldn't say that I was like aware of trying to be fearless, but there were moments where I would notice that I was getting really cramped by what I would call like an ableist gaze or something, where I noticed that I was actually writing all of my kind of anxieties about being pathologized, being stereotyped, being limited. And that always felt like shit. And then I would just kind of have to, this happened multiple times over the 10 years, but I would have to at some point be like, fuck that. What do I just want to write about? Like, what do I want to say? What do I want to think about? And when that moment happened, it felt great. And then the literary references and the artistic references could really open up. I'm still really disappointed that I really wanted to write an essay in here on Felix Gonzalez Torres. And Bob Flanagan would have totally been part of that piece. And it just didn't fit, or I didn't have the time, or I'm not there yet. There are some disappointments I have about things I wanted to do in the book, but wasn't able to. And those are also ghosts that are haunting it, that hopefully can linger into the future. Like I would love the Felix Gonzalez Torres ghost to linger a little longer and get me to actually write this piece. Yeah, thank you for that question. I love that question. I'm gonna, of course, tonight be like, oh, and then there were these other ones, and I'll not be able to tell you, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, that was an incredible question. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Johanna. Our next question will be from Chloe. Chloe, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Johanna. Hi, Vicky. This conversation was just a gift. Thank you both so much for your dialogue. It has been such a pleasure to listen to. Johanna, I am curious how you think about the hospitalization of death, which is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about relative to much of your conversation today, and especially like what it has meant for death as care, death as abundance, as this sort of innate thing that's threaded into everyday life. And yeah, I'm just really curious to hear you speak a bit about that.
Yeah, I think a lot about it. The opening essay has a long section about the deaths that I have witnessed in my own family. My maternal grandmother died in a hospital, and I was laying next to her in the bed and holding her hand when she died. And that happened 12 years ago, and it profoundly changed who I am and how I live. Like she's one of the ancestors that's here with me now. My mother died not in a hospital, and I have often thought that if we had gotten to her in time and been able to take her to the hospital, it might have prolonged her life a little bit, but she probably would have hated it dying in a hospital. She got to at least die in her own room, her own safe, home space. And then my grandmother, my paternal grandmother just died last year in a home. And she was alone. I was packing to get on a plane to go be with her. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of this book there's a lot just personally that I wanted to write about in terms of my encounters with death, how my relationships with all three of these women continue and actually have been really, I don't want to say they've gotten better, but they've certainly really healed in a lot of ways now that we have a relationship with them in this other realm. when my mother died, I started working with a death doula, and I have for years worked with a death doula, and I regularly see my Korean shaman where I can, communicate with my ancestral spirits. And so I don't know, for me, like active death work, active grief work is a really, really important part of my own spiritual practice. I mean, I like talk to my ancestors every day. And I guess one of the things that my death doula and I were talking about was that, there's so much knowledge in the body around death. There's so many impulses that your own body has to keep you alive, to help you survive, all of this. And that there is something really necessary in that knowledge to also preparing you for death. Which is one of the things. My death doula worked as the grief counselor in a hospice. And they told me, like all of us who work at this hospice believe in some kind of supernatural something just because we have seen enough weird shit go on at the moment of death. And I do really like, I guess, there were many years in my life where I was a very atheist kind of, we're just here one time, we're a lump of matter, and that's it. I was really reading a lot of like fucking white male philosophers at that time, and it just didn't really. Then my grandmother died, and then I got sick, and then my mother died, and I experienced all this stuff in those moments that just wasn't accounted for in like the kind of dominant Western European Enlightenment rational discourse. And I guess, yeah, this is just to say I have found more solace in traditions and practices and spiritual work that includes death as like part of life on a daily level. So yeah, I would say that. I think I mean, I work with it every day. I think about it every day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chloe, for bringing that question into the space, and thank you, Johanna. We've got a few more questions. The next question, I'll read from an audience member. How do you think about the entanglements of addiction as a disability? How do you think about the entanglements of drug addiction as a disability, care for and abuse by, as well as forgiveness and its Christian connotation?
That's a great question. There is a piece in the book about this. It's called Soft Until It Gets Hard. I think about this a lot. My mother was an addict and died of her addiction. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon because of being raised by an addict. I have also been in love with addicts and abused by them, and found spiritual ways to work toward forgiving them and having compassion for them. This is something I wish was more talked about actually in disability discourse. I mean, it was important to me to have this one piece in my own book about it. I also do talk about my mother quite a lot and her struggles with addiction throughout her life. I don't know. I don't really have answers other than, yeah, I wish that there was more discussion about it because I think it is difficult. One of the things I noticed, I had a relationship for the last year with an addict. And when this person was high, they were definitely abusive. And I noticed that when I would talk about that, like with my friends or my therapist or whatever, there was a really like punitive, judgmental, moralizing reaction. And this person had their own, I mean, really deep, gnarly PTSD. and mental health issues and neurodivergence, and they were queer and, you know, working class, and they had, you know, there was a lot there that, you know, that contributed to the complexity of the situation. They were not just evil or abusive or bad. This is a person that I love deeply, but I can't be with, you know. So I guess I think about this a lot. Again, it goes back to that question of like, what do we owe each other? How do we take care of each other? I think a central kind of conundrum, and many disability justice activists have really made great contributions to really thinking about this, is like, how do we care for people who are sometimes monsters? What is the obligation, you know, socially, ethically? Like if someone fucks up, if someone perpetuates harm, if someone commits an act of violence, like what are our obligations to that person in terms of caring for them, supporting them, rehabilitating them, re-educating them? You know, all of these questions, reparative justice, rehabilitative justice. What does it look like to not just banish them into a carceral kind of, you know, you're out, you need to be punished. I think about this quite a lot. I think Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasina has written like really, really important stuff about this in care work and the future is disabled. And I mean, literally, Leah is a fucking icon walking around on this planet for us. Thank you, Leah. I think that there have also been some interesting contributions to this discourse, like Gabor Mate's stuff I actually really enjoy. In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, that book was really informative for me. Just thinking about trauma and what to do with it on a social scale. I really appreciate Buddhist meditations on addiction. There's some great ones, just like YouTubing Buddhist nuns talking about what to do with addiction. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's something that I really want, I hope is more included in how we talk about disability and illness and care and obligations to each other. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer, Johanna. I'll ask the final question for the Q&A today. I'm wondering if you could speak a little more about the relationship between your visual artistic practice and your literary practice. And I'm not sure if this is related, but I feel like it could be. I'm also just in thinking about some of the ideas that are present in disability activism, and what you've been talking about today, about world building and kind of imagination and like re-navigating space in a, you know, completely different way. I'm curious about whether sci-fi or like futurism genres play into your practice at all. Yeah, if there's anything there.
Oh my God, we could talk about sci-fi for a while. Yes. I mean, yeah, I like watch a movie a day. I'm really like a movie fan, too much. Like, don't get me talking about the AMC Stubs membership being amazing and how I can recite the entire Nicole Kidman ad. I am like on Letterboxd, bitch. Like I am on this app. Thankfully anonymously. Don't like follow me because then you'll like laugh at my choices. Anyway. I think that imaginative, speculative inquiry, curiosity is necessary to political organizing and ambition. And to be frank, I sometimes am like, I cannot even imagine what a world built around care would look like. I just can't imagine it. I cannot, you know? And so I think a lot of my work around this topic has been just trying to reach for what might be there. Like, would it look like this? Maybe it'll look like that. I don't know. Like, just what happens if we think about that? I am like a really, I'm a really promiscuous person in a lot of ways. Like, and I get into trouble, I think, because of it. But I'm certainly promiscuous in terms of just like, I want to just like be confused about what I'm looking at. Not necessarily that it's new, but I just want to be like, whoa, I've never seen that before, or I could never have imagined that happening. And I mean this in terms of art, in terms of social organization, in terms of people, in terms of movies. I just want to, when I'm looking at something, be like, wow, that's confusing, or that's new, or that's delightfully surprising. That's something that's changing what I thought was possible. And that's certainly kind of the mode that I'm always operating in when I'm making anything myself. And this thing that Vicky mentioned earlier is this like kind of phrase I've been liking to say for a couple of years, that I just love a little bit of hermeneutical mischief. I love it. I just want there to be like mischief and tricksterism and shape-shifting and drag and persona and costumes, and just like, I just love all that shit. And I do need it. Like, I need to feel like if I'm sitting down to write like a drag of an essay, and I mean drag in a heavy way, like about my grandmother's dying, you know, like I just also need to be able to think other forms that are possible around those topics. I need to be able to put knives in the wall of a gallery or a museum. I need to be able to scream in a room with a, you know, Marshall stack behind me. Yeah, these are all my knives. I have so many knives, and I just need to put them in every wall of every museum. It's just sort of what I need to do. Yeah. I do think that like this is one of the things C.A. Conrad has talked about this too. Silvia Federici has talked about this, is like kind of becoming re-enchanted with the world. C.A. Conrad has talked about that we can't really save the world that we've already lost in terms of climate change. So we have to kind of fall in love with the world right now. Like, it's not so useful to sort of mourn the past that we've lost to get us toward a future. We have to kind of be like, yeah, but right now, what can we do right now with where we are, with what we're starting from? Every person has something within reach, you know? And I think that's it. The reach for me is very important. It doesn't necessarily need to end up at the place that we were all hoping it would, but the reach itself for me is the method. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end there. Thank you for the question.
Wow, that was just so incredible. Thank you so much, Johanna. And thank you so much, Vicky, for your super generative questions and prompts. This has been such an honor, and yeah, just truly an amazing conversation. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in this evening. And also, we'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and for helping make these daily conversations possible. They also help support our archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. And this conversation is being recorded and will be posted there soon. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. Can support our writers, production staff, and operations through the link in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a conversation with Leila Babier and Ksenia Msoboliva on the event of We Have History. That's up now at De Young Museum in San Francisco. Huge thanks again to you, Johanna, and to you, Vicky. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. You can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Johanna,
you.
Vicky.
Thank
That
you.
was
That was
amazing.
exhilarating.
Thank you so
Really good.
much.